Hi, everybody. We'll be starting in just a minute or so. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. Give you another minute to get settled, and we're going to dive in. Welcome, folks. We shall start in about 30 seconds. Thanks for joining. All right, folks, rolling in. Welcome in, guys. All right, well, let's get rolling. It's 2:01 Eastern. I want to welcome everybody to MediaFly's Value webinar, How to Overcome Sales Objections with Value. My name is Dan Sixsmith. I am the SVP of Value at MediaFly. I'll be the host and moderator of this great session today. We've got two outstanding guests here, two experts in the field of value. We've got Julie Thomas, who is the president and CEO of Value Selling Associates, and we've got Jeff Collins, who is the global head of value consulting for Coupa, the fast-growing technology company. And I'll turn it over to each of them to do a little quick intro, and then we'll dive in. So Julie, you first. Welcome.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here this morning with Dan and Jeff. As Dan mentioned, my name is Julie and I'm with Value Selling Associates. And we work with companies that are trying to transition from maybe pushing product or a product-centric approach to a value-oriented solution or approach. And what that means is they want to develop the skills and behaviors in their teams to focus on identifying business outcomes that they can quantify as a result of implementing their products and services. So we help them kind of flip the script a little bit, if you will, in how they approach opportunities, how they qualify, advance, and close those opportunities. And I'm thrilled to be here today to speak with all of you.
Thanks so much, Julie. Jeff, welcome.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan. I am fortunate enough to lead a team of global consultants who are truly experts in understanding, quantifying potential value for Coupa's customers, and then we also work with our existing customers to quantify realized value. So really understanding the entire end-to-end customer lifecycle journey. Came to Coupa about 9 years ago. For those of you who don't know, Coupa is leading technology company in business spend management. We help our customers source and procure and process invoice payments, and really from the very far upstream end of the process all the way to the point of payment. Coupa is delivering value to our customers.
Terrific. Well, glad to have you both. So let's dive in with a little bit of a kind of backdrop as to, why is this webinar today so important? What's going on in B2B sales? Why is selling with value so critical as we move forward into 2024? So, with all the technology advancements, it seems as if sellers are getting even less face time with buyers than ever before. Only 5% of buyers selling, in the buying process is spent with a seller, which is down considerably from some of the earlier research we've seen in other years. And buyers are now 70% of the way through their process before engaging a seller. So all the more reason why when sellers engage, they really need to make it count. Also, what we're seeing from the research, this is from the RAIN group, ROI and business cases are critical in moving the needle. 66% of buyers say it's critical, but yet only 16% of sellers are able to make an effective ROI case. So there is a dramatic gap in the expectations of buyers and what sellers are delivering. And then also we're seeing that 56% are still stuck at the dreaded no decision. It's prospective customers who just wind up going dark. So that has not improved over the years. And then as we move forward here, we've got some additional research that actually Mediafly did, showing that the high-performing organizations are actually 19% more likely to have a value-selling methodology than the lower performers. We've also seen from Gartner that value assessments are actually the top-ranked piece of content to improve buyer confidence, which is also very interesting. And then also in terms of business value assessments, right? The higher performing organizations, 38% more likely to leverage business value assessments than the lower performers. And then lastly, the higher performers are 37% more likely to track their success through the use of content and data and insights. And the high performers are defined as those that are actually achieving their goals. So with this as the backdrop, let's dive into this and talk about, what are some of the common sales objections that you're hearing today in your travel. So Julie, let's start with you and then we'll jump over to Jeff. What are some of those top objections that are coming up today?
Well, the objection always seems to boil down to price and what the investment is that you're making. And I think there's two root causes for that objection. Number one, as you said, sales is hard. Well, I really think buying has become hard.
Yeah.
You've got so many people involved in the process trying to get consensus, and some of these people internally in the buying organization couldn't agree on what pizza to order for lunch, let alone what software tool to purchase to advance their business. So sometimes that pricing objection comes out of, are you really able to differentiate your solution to understand the incremental value that accrues only to you and not just to the category? And then I also think in certain situations, we see there's two sales. I have to win in my category. I have to be the best sales methodology that you're going to consider. But then I have to help you as the buyer build the case to stand up to somebody who's sitting in a boardroom and deciding, hey, am I going to do sales methodology or am I going to automate some of my financial processes? And which one gets the bigger bang for my buck? So I think value has become much more complicated. It's not just, is there value? It's how much value and how does that compare to all the other buying decisions that are vying for the resources that we have.
Yeah, agreed. Budgets are tighter. So, value becomes way more important. And then you make such an important point. This whole building consensus in the deals is really pivotal. There's so many different stakeholders, right? We've seen the research between 15 and maybe even 20 in some of these enterprise deals. How do we as sellers build consensus among that group and get them all pointed in the right direction toward, signing off on a deal? So super good points there, Julie. What about you, Jeff? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so I think Julie makes a good point around price, and I think the problem is that it is difficult for buyers to differentiate on their own the various options to them for solving a particular problem or taking advantage of an opportunity. And some of your statistics that you shared at the very beginning, Dan, around they're doing a lot of their own research. They're spending less time with the potential partner to help them take advantage of their opportunities. I think there's a misperception on the part of buyers that they know what they think they know what they need to know in order to make an informed decision. The kinds of objections, and I'm going to use Coupa as an example of the kinds of objections we get. There's certainly a wide range of things we could talk about, but Coupa is a platform, and a lot of our customers have a specific problem that they want to solve, but they come very focused on a specific problem. So let's say it's they want to gain some efficiencies in terms of generating contracts. And so they go looking for a contract lifecycle management solution, thinking if I can just get better at that particular function, we'll solve our problems. And what they're not necessarily thinking about is the value that could accrue from taking a holistic look, a transformational look at their opportunity. And so the objection we often get is, hey, look, we just want to solve one specific problem. We're not trying to boil the ocean. And what we're coming back to them and saying is, look, engage with us in a meaningful conversation around where your opportunities are from a business value perspective. And what you might find out, and quite frankly, based on our own research, is absolutely true, is that if you take this sort of transformational approach, you realize the value of solving the problems that are associated with some siloed activity like generating contracts. But then because you have a platform, that you actually end up with greater value than if you had just solved each individual problem. You end up with this sort of synergistic value of having complete visibility across a whole transactional flow, if you will. And until you break into the value conversation, you really start engaging with the customer in a partnership fashion to understand where value could accrue, that all too often the objection is simply, hey, we just want to solve one problem. And we're not really trying to think about, from a value perspective, what could we do for our organization? I don't know, Julie, if that resonates with you, but that's certainly something that we see.
Oh, we see that as well. And the challenge with buyers right now is they don't know what they don't know. And I think that so they identify this little sliver of the pie and they become so focused on that, they're not necessarily able to self-diagnose that there could be a broader application. And they come to you and say, just as you're saying, which in many cases makes it hard to differentiate because you're looking at one little piece of the pie. I have a payroll client that has that. I mean, you don't get a whole lot more commoditized than payroll, but they try to sell, all the services that go around that, and it's a challenge for them to differentiate when somebody just wants one thing.
Yeah, agreed. We both talked a little bit, but before the webinar, on these stalled deals and this whole notion of risk averse, buyers that are risk averse. What can sellers do today to help mitigate that and move some of these deals along and not fall into the 56% of pipeline that's just stuck, stalled out? Jeff, what do you think about that?
Thanks. So I think this idea of being risk averse is really important, and what we see quite often is that individuals within a customer organization are loath to make a decision on their own. Even in the case of maybe a siloed solution, a point solution, they still want to build consensus within the organization. I think one of the biggest problems is that the analyses that are conducted, if they don't actually dive into a more data-driven approach, right? If it's at a high level, and without really drilling down into what's the probability of success, what are I'm going to go a little bit deeper, but what are all the activities that would need to take place in order to be successful, and then talk through what those activities would be, you end up with I think a lot of uncertainty within the customer organization. They're not sure about change management, they're not sure about ongoing support of say a technology solution, and these unknowns become a weight on the ability of a customer to make a decision. What we found at Coupa, and the way that we'd like to engage with customers, is we ask them, look, give us your data, give us your transactional data, let us engage with you in a meaningful fashion, have meaningful conversations. We want to move well past that 5% of the time, and we want to spend as much time as possible to understand your environment, your situation, how likely you are to be successful. And then what we want to do is provide you with a risk-adjusted rate of return that can be compared with your other investment opportunities, so you can make a really informed investment decision, because every CFO has a list of investments that the organization would like to make. And the question is, how do you decide which ones have a real ROI versus which have this sort of fictitious, pumped up ROI based on either the vendor or vested interest within the company? So the answer for me, and how you de-risk a project is you become a partner with the vendor. Don't If you think of them as just trying to sell you something and not really helping you take advantage of opportunities, I think you're always going to suffer from that uncertainty, and you're going to miss out on a lot of really great opportunities to impact the organization in a positive way.
That's great. Julie, let's talk a little bit about speed, right? And the why now. Some of the research I've seen is that, most sellers are good at asking questions, right? Then it drops off a little bit in their ability to kind of tie the benefits to those strategic issues. But the biggest fall off is to get customers to act now. Why now? What can sellers do today to try and speed deals along?
Well, the number one thing that we see that sellers sometimes either forget or assume is when you talk about the strategic business imperatives associated with the company and a potential prospect, most of those are time bound. We're going to improve margins in 2024 or 2025. Very rarely have I ever heard a CEO say, someday we're going to focus on this.
Yeah.
And so when they can connect to the time-bound nature of the strategic business imperatives, they can use that to create a timeline. And that timeline focuses on value realization, which creates urgency and momentum to take action. And what I see is most sales reps stop that timeline at implementation. You're going to sign a contract with us. We're all going to pop a bottle of champagne. Then I'm going to kick off the project and everybody's going to be happy. They focus on implementation as opposed to value realization. But the subtle thing that's also missing in a lot of this value conversation is we know there's a lot of things that do have ROI that don't get purchased. You could walk the halls of my business and identify some things that probably I could invest in tomorrow that would make a difference, but they're not on my radar right now. And I've got bigger fish to fry, if you might, if you will. So it's not a matter of just having ROI. You've also got to align to the hearts and the motivation of those decision makers and get their attention. And we call that personal value. So all of this is business value, and there's no question that it's important. It has to be there. But if I don't also resonate to the buyers themselves about what gets them excited, I could miss an opportunity to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's great. Jeff, on your side, how are you guys dealing with the personal value and being able to kind of, pivot by different committee members' interests?
Yeah, it's a great question. Julie's points were really well made. It's one thing to generate an ROI for the organization, but it's much more important to align with the strategic objectives of that organization, and then also align with the personal objectives of the people that you're selling to. And within Coupa, we spend a lot of time selling to finance. They tend to own the business problems that Coupa addresses. However, you can't sell a technology solution without dealing with the IT side of the house. And I think all too often we don't talk about the value to IT. I'm using IT as an example of Julie's point. What is it that motivates IT, and how does in my case Coupa, how does Coupa create value for the CIO or the director of IT, right? The people that are responsible for maintaining systems to make sure that the business runs well. We do have a value proposition. We do have a way of impacting their day-to-day and perhaps even align with the way that they're compensated. And I think that understanding those personas, understanding what motivates those personas has to be part of your value message in order to be successful. If you don't align with those personas, even the ones you perhaps are not comfortable talking to, the probability of success goes way down.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, what we see is certainly the importance of strategic discovery. We build that into a lot of the methodology and the tools that we create, being able to pivot in a guided selling fashion, depending on who you're meeting with and what's important to them. And then, as you said, kind of positioning the value that's going to be important to that particular stakeholder. So another interesting thing that's happened since the pandemic is we've seen way more senior executives and C-suiters involved in buying process and also in the selling process. So talk a little bit about how we can use value to really have an impact on someone from the C-suite. Julie, how about you to start?
Well, I think that is an interesting observation. You know, pre-pandemic, when 90% of our interactions were face-to-face in many cases, you know, you went to the meeting and if the executive couldn't be there, they delegated, right?
Right.
Well, you know, now it's like I'm involved because I can be, because everything's, you know, on a Zoom call or a Teams call or something like that. So I think that the key issue is now the key to any of these large, complex buying committees is getting insight to the individuals involved in the purchase. Because the reality is, in any of these committees, I defy any sales rep to say I know exactly who the main influencer is. I can pinpoint exactly who the saboteur is, and there will be one somewhere. There's going to be, you know, Oscar the Grouch saying, no, we can't do this. And to also mitigate what I call the yeah, but syndrome. Yeah, that was a great ROI, but we're a little different here. And then they discount the ROI and it's not motivating, it's working against us. And we need to understand that. So the key is, how do we get some insight to them? And I think sales reps have to be courageous in finding ways to interact both with the buying committee as a whole and one-on-one. Sometimes it's just a one-on-one chat during the Zoom call where you're asking that senior executive, hey, is this resonating with you? Is there anything in addition that you're worried about? And trying to leverage different ways to communicate to build trust and get greater insight. Because it's all about what they think, not what they even say.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you even wrote in your book about that. You know, you really have to think like an executive in order to go into this conversation, right? And what do they care about? What are their strategic initiatives? And they don't want, here's the thing that we've learned, the C-suite does not want to sit through a discovery session and go through an interrogation. They want to get right down to business. They want to know you've done the research, and they want to be taught something new. You know, they want you to come in and ask the tough questions, but then, you know, lay it on the line about what they might be doing wrong, you know, and then talk about your own solution. So it's a very interesting balance. Jeff, what about you on the kind of C-suite engagement side?
Yeah, so I think for us, we don't want to sell a tactical solution. We don't want to just sell a solution that lets you process invoices. That, while that's an important functional sort of aspect to what we do, we want to be a transformational partner. We want to be a strategic partner with you. We want to deliver a solution that helps you achieve your business goals. And so once, and quite frankly, if you can't get to those C-level executives, you will be commoditized and you will constantly be competing on price. You will not be competing on what really matters. And this is kind of where we started, right, Julie, where we started talking about price. What we should be talking about is value. That's what the decision should be made on, not on price. If you find yourself in a pricing conversation, you weren't talking to the right people in the customer organization, right? So for me, you have to understand those personas. You have to understand what motivates them, what they care about, the way in which they're compensated, what they're trying to achieve with their careers. And you need to figure out how you can be a partner to deliver for them personally as well as for the organization. Because quite frankly, those two things, you know, reinforce one another. When we spend a lot of time talking to CFOs, and for a CFO, we changed a lot of from the way we used to talk to the way we talk today, it has changed significantly because we do want to be that strategic partner. So we're talking about optimizing cash as opposed to reducing costs. We're talking about something beyond just savings, right? We're talking about the bigger picture issues. We oftentimes translate the ROI into something the CFO would care about. I was working with a very large retailer, for example, and we were talking about saving. We originally started talking about saving them money, and they kind of rolled their eyes. Yeah, you're going to save us money. Everybody still wants to save us money. And then we dove into the data, built out the case, and translated it from savings, because on the margin it probably didn't really move the needle for them, to how much profit do you generate per store? How many stores would you have to open in order to generate the same bottom line impact? That makes it real, because they know they have limited opportunity to open new retail locations, right? So again, I'm a bit all over the place, and I apologize for that. But the point really I think I'm trying to make is that figure out what motivates that person, translate your message into a message that will resonate.
Yeah, I love that. And that gets us into kind of the next phase of this. And also, folks, feel free to put some questions in the chat. We'll be doing questions in about probably 5 or 8 minutes to close things out. But let's talk about execution a little bit. It just seems that this value selling is not easily adopted all the time by sellers. So, Julie, what have you seen? What are some of the ways that companies are getting buy-in across the organization for value selling? Because where we've seen it successful is where the senior management is bought in. There's almost a culture behind it, but that's not always the case. So what are you seeing out there?
Well, I would agree with you. I do think it is not just a sales function. I think value selling is how you think about your customers, how you think about your engagement strategy, and it is an organizational approach. It's not just sales anymore. Everybody's in sales to a certain extent, and that's part of it. Number two, sales is an interesting profession, because there are times when a sales rep cannot do value selling at all, do everything wrong, and then still close the biggest deal in the company's history because the buyer did it in spite of them as opposed to because of them. So I think we need to recognize how we motivate salespeople. And just like our customers need a reason to change, so do salespeople. Because new behaviors make them uncomfortable, even if it's this whole identifying the buying team and asking second, third level questions about who are all the people, what are their roles. And I still hear from some salespeople, I'm afraid of offending the person who is telling me information if I ask them some of those questions. And so we all have blind spots, we all get in our own way, and we're all afraid of certain things. So I think there's a number of things. I think organizations that do approach it and do a lot to recognize success and early indicators get a lot more momentum earlier, and they get that flywheel going.
Yeah, no, I love that. Jeff, what about you at Coupa? How are you driving kind of buy-in to value selling there?
So value selling is actually really core to our DNA. When we first started as a software company, we were competing with very large companies that had all the bells and whistles, right? And we spent a lot of time talking to prospective customers saying, look, these organizations, or these alternative solutions, I should say, have a lot of feature function, but are they delivering value? Because in our space, everybody already owns something, right? And so you would go in, you would understand from a KPI perspective how the organization was performing, and say, look, you have a solution that has really robust functionality, but it's not delivering any value to you, right? And wouldn't it be, and for us, it's about how do you capturing as much spend as possible. You don't capture the spend, you can't actually control the spend, you can't source, you can't do a lot of the things that create value for the organization. And the reason that the other competing solutions weren't delivering the value that they could have delivered is they were difficult to use and people didn't like using them. So the goal was to say, look, we are hyper focused on usability. If the main thing we want to do is capture all that spend, and that would deliver value. So our salespeople bought into that message because that was what was working in the marketplace, and we grew very rapidly because we hyper focused on value. Today, we're a more robust organization. We are the feature function organization that we weren't, say, 10 years ago when I started. So to reinforce value, we look at deals and the quality of the sale based on the price that we generate relative to the value that the customer expects to get. And so a quality deal is a deal where we're realizing a sort of set fraction of the value that's expected to be delivered. And by the way, this is value that the customer signs up for. This isn't just this isn't sales value. This is a ROI that the customer agrees to, right? And so it's for us, growing the organization and growing annual contract value, ACV, for us, it's really about building the understanding of value and having the customer have confidence in that value and a willingness to pay a fair price for the fair delivery of a return.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. This whole, notion of co-creating value is so important, right? So if you work well with a prospect and they help you put together that business case, then they're bought in, and that's one of the things that, maybe is not widely known. It's not all about you delivering an ROI business case, but it's a collaborative effort and really working closely with your prospect. So I know we've got a bunch of questions. Maybe we can jump into that, but let's end with this whole kind of post-sale value and how do we keep customers? Because, renewals are the new demand generation is something I heard recently. So Jeff, how are you all handling post-sale value, keeping customers versus getting them? And how is that different than, the pre-sale approach?
Yeah, it's interesting. So my standard line is, as a SaaS company, we live and die with renewals and referrals, right? And if we don't get your renewal, you don't have that beneficial sort of spiral, the flywheel of value. When it comes to the quantification of realized value, a couple of years ago, we approached our product development people and said, look, what we'd really like to do is embed value realization in the platform. We want people to be able to go into a set of dashboards and in real time understand what their investment in Coupa is delivering for them. And so what we've done is we've created those value dashboards where when a customer is implemented, we can input their baseline information, understand sort of what the current state was, and then as transactions flow through the platform, we can capture the realized value, whether that's increasing the amount of spend under management or realizing savings from sourcing activity where transactions are being aligned with the contractual pricing that's been negotiated. So we're actually quantifying as those transactions occur against the contract how much savings is being realized. I think if it's possible for you to quantify value, realize value in that way through the system, that's optimal. However, it's not always possible. Sometimes the measures of value are not easily captured in software, and therefore you sort of have to take a more ad hoc approach to working with customers. And we have a customer success organization that is dedicated to doing that work as well. So it's sort of a multi-pronged approach to quantification of value. But then the one thing I would say more than anything else is you have to commit to that. All too often, what we see, and there's a real risk to value realization, is the shiny object syndrome, where people get excited about a project, they go through the process of making a decision, they implement, everybody shakes hands, they pop the cork, as Julie said, and then they walk away feeling like, hey, we solved that problem, let's go on. And that is not the way that you actually optimize and maximize your return on your investment in technology, right? You do it by making it a core competency within the organization that you are going to adopt, you're going to optimize that solution, and you are going to measure on an ongoing basis the return to the organization from their investment.
Absolutely. Julie, how about you in terms of keeping customers?
Yeah, so a couple things. So prior to joining Value Selling a number of years ago, I grew up at Gartner Group long before SaaS was even a thing. And so I was doing ACV before ACV and renewals before ACV was cool, if you will. And what we learned, I think, is a couple of things. Number one, you've got to treat renewals with the same rigor of qualification as new business, because the probability that the same people that have to sign off on the renewal are the people that bought it in the first place in today's world are slim to none, especially if you've had a multi-year agreement. So you've got to continue to do that. The second thing that I think often plays into renewals is experience, because every competitor is calling on that account trying to unhook you, and they're trying to give them a reason to change, and you've got to now provide them a reason to stay. And yes, I agree with Jeff. Absolutely, if you have the ability to capture the value and get them bought into that, because change is hard and switching is risky, I think that that's important, but really focusing on that customer and their experience. For years at Gartner, we would be surprised on some renewals. Well, they attended all of our events. They were calling the analysts. They seemed to open the emails and read our research. And then when push came to shove, they didn't renew because maybe they had bought for a project and that project was done. I rolled out my desktop strategy. I don't need that service anymore, or what have you. So it's really continually finding reasons for them to stay as well, and making sure that experience is good. I've actually heard people say right now, because of the economic uncertainty, a couple of our clients have told us our pipeline we thought was really robust because we were eating into competitive market share. And because of the economic uncertainty, people are saying, you know what, I'm going to stay with the devil I know rather than switch to the devil I don't, even if I really, really want to, because switching is hard.
Yeah, there's that whole risk thing again.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Very
it's
interesting.
real. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And, pre-sales, we're fighting against the status quo. And then post-sales, the status quo is our friend, right? So we have to position the value messaging differently. And certainly the calculation. So very excellent conversation. Thank you both for a great session today. We've got a bunch of questions, so let me try and go through a few here. There's one for Julie. You mentioned speeding deals along, reps focused on the implementation timeline, not time to value. Can you elaborate what you mean by that and why that's such a concern?
Well, I think it's a great tactic for value selling sales professionals or revenue professionals to really keep in mind that the value realization is the ultimate business motivation for them to take action with you in the first place. So are we using that during the sales cycle to paint a really good picture for the prospect and buying committee to understand what that's going to look like when that value is realized, how that's going to feel, what the time frame is going to be for that, and focus them on that, which is their motivating outcome, as opposed to on getting the purchase order and implementation, which is the grind, right? And so it's a tactic to really use value realization as the motivation to take action throughout all of your interactions. And we start that process from the very beginning by understanding the time-bound nature of the strategic business imperatives that they're focused on.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, we see companies bringing in the delivery teams and the customer success teams and start to paint the picture of what it's going to be like when they get on the other side of those challenges, and not be myopically focused on, let's get the deal signed and see you later, right? Great. Okay, another question. Can you give a few different examples of different industries and different company sizes that achieved significant ROI with the tool? Well, if we're talking about our tool or our platform, I mean, we've been at it for a long time. We've got over 100 customers, from the very big enterprise customers to some of the up and growing fast-paced unicorns like Databricks and Snowflake. And what we've been able to do is get many of these customers, give them the ability to scale value across the organization. So by leveraging interactive tools, right, that help the sellers with a guided discovery, some value-focused messaging and storytelling, and then giving them the ability to quantify value without the help of a Jeff and his team. That's where we've had the most impact in helping companies grow revenue. So we've seen examples of companies 6 and 7 times X their win rate, competitive win rate, when they use a value tool versus not. We've seen selling prices increase. We've seen cycle time decrease. So having something that gives them the ability to pivot and be nimble, we've had a lot of great success with. So great
Hey,
question. Yeah,
Dan, do you
Jeff.
mind if I jump in on that?
Yeah, by all means.
I know you're keenly aware of how we use MediaFly at Coupa, but so when you start talking about how do you make value selling part of a sales team's DNA, what we've been able to do with the tool that we've built with you is, first of all, scale my organization, because there's no way that just a handful of consultants distributed globally could touch all the deals across all the different market segments. So the tool is then used in order to generate an understanding of value of an ROI, if you will, but then also from a granular perspective, how that ROI would be created. And what it's allowed us to do is not only to utilize the sales team as an extended value consulting organization, but then also as an enablement tool to get both our sales professionals to understand how Coupa creates measurable business value, but then also utilize the tool in a customer-facing situation to educate the customer on how to think about how the solution will create value. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Let's see here. You touched on over 50% of deals going cold, or even prospects ghosting you. How do you prevent this from happening in the first place, or rescue a deal that has gone cold? Who wants to take that one?
I'll take
Okay.
a stab at it. I wish I had a silver bullet on this one. I'd write a book and retire. But the reality is, often people ghost us because they haven't made the connection of what's in it for them, both business value or personal value, and everything's all about the sales rep. It's my need. I need to get this done, or I need to have this next meeting, or I need to pitch this to you, and it's not focused on the customer's needs. So one of the ways to proactively mitigate that is by focusing on them, not you. The timelines that you build, it's not your timeline. It's their timeline. They're telling you when they can agree to some of these milestones. And if they can't tell you about some of these milestones, that might be a little red flag that this isn't as far along or as real as you might thought it would be. But it's working their timeline, not forcing yours, is the key to some of that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah, and I think it's differentiation in these initial calls. There was a stat a few years ago, I haven't seen it updated, but it said only 17% of sellers get a second meeting because they just don't deliver enough value. So differentiation, we've seen content being huge today in differentiating. And content is the 12th man out there. Not only what you present, but what you follow up and send out afterward, that the buyers can engage and share. with their team.
So Dan, can I build on that for one
by all means,
second?
please.
You know, I've read articles that discovery is dead, but the reality is in early meetings, early sales cycles, discovery has to be mutual. You can't just interrogate the customer. You have to also give them enough to entice them to continue the conversation. Because while you're trying to determine whether or not they're a fit for you, they're doing the same thing. And I think some sales reps forget that discovery is mutual. And you have to add as much value and give as much as you take in that initial meeting if you expect them to agree to. People spend their time before they spend their money.
That's a great point. I agree 100%. Let's see. Many motions around value selling revolve around cost reductions or reduce risk. How does this change for helping customers create products in new markets?
Well, I'll take that because I work with sales and revenue organizations like MediaFly. Often the business case for value selling a sales methodology is what is my incremental top line revenue going to be as a result of this initiative? There might be some cost savings aspects to it, but often it's like, how do I grow my deal size? How do I open a new market? How do I sell the breadth of my product line? And they're measuring that in incremental sales to justify the investment to train and develop their teams. So the key to value working for you is to understanding, hey, if you're successful with the product or service that you sell to your prospect, how will you measure that success? How will you know that that made a difference in your business? And letting them tell you the metrics and then facilitating the conversation on how you could impact that, as opposed to telling them what the metric might be.
I would add, so if you're trying to penetrate new markets or bring new products to market, those things require investment. And so when you start thinking about values, cost savings, maybe you're freeing up some cash in that fashion that can be then used to invest in something else. That's true. But for us, it's also thinking about how do you optimize cash within the business. And so there may be opportunities, right, to create a cash management benefit, freeing up that cash. It's a one-time benefit, but it can be quite substantial. So going back to the example of translating the value arguments into something that's meaningful for an organization, for a customer organization, was working with a company that wanted to bring new products to market, and they were looking to do that through acquisition. They were looking to find some new ways to augment their existing revenue streams. And so we took a look in their financial filings and looked at the 4 acquisitions they'd made the year before, and one of them was about a $70 million acquisition. And via an analysis of their data, we showed them that we could free up more than $70 million worth of cash, and they could have then added yet another acquisition. Those acquisitions de-risk the business, generate bottom line benefit to the business. So what I would argue is that even in a world where you're talking about savings, I think if you cast a broader net and really think about all the ways in which you create value, you need to be a little bit creative, you need to be a little bit thoughtful. But if you broaden that net, what you're going to find is there are a lot of ways that you can help customers who are trying to expand their business through new product development or new market development.
Love it. Well, I think we got through all the questions. I want to thank both Julie and Jeff. Julie and Jeff, how do folks connect with you? What's the best way to get in touch?
I'll start with that. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. Best way, certainly, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, or I hope I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. Julie Thomas and Value Selling, or send me an email at julie.thomas@valueselling.com. Would love to hear from you.
Great. Jeff?
Honestly, my answer is the exact same as Julie. Easy to find on LinkedIn, but my email address, and I will happily respond, is jeff.collins@coupa.com.
Great.
And I do appreciate, Dan, you and all of the folks that signed up today. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Julie.
Absolutely. Thank you, MediaFly, for pulling this together.
You're so welcome. I want to thank everyone that signed up. If you'd like to follow up with me, dsixsmith@mediafly.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I've also got a podcast, Sales is King, and we do a weekly blog called Value Stories. Feel free to message me there, but I really appreciate the great questions and your participation today, and want to again thank Jeff and Julie for being with us, and wish you all a great rest of the day. Thanks for joining today.